All right, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Okay, so today we're cracking open Genesis chapters 10 and 11. We've got the Table of Nations, the Tower of Babel story, all that good stuff.
Yeah, classic Genesis.
We've got a whole bunch of interpretations to sift through: pastors, theologians, the works.
Oh, yeah. Always lots to unpack there.
So let's see what we can unearth. I always find some fascinating historical and cultural nuggets in these chapters.
Especially these chapters. People tend to just kind of breeze over them sometimes, but there's a lot there.
Yeah, they're kind of in between, the creation stories and then the stories of the patriarchs.
Exactly.
All right, so Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, it's basically like a giant family tree, right?
It is. It's like, it's trying to map out the entire world as they knew it back then.
Right. Tracing the origins of, well, nations, ethnic groups, all stemming from Noah's sons.
Yeah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Those guys. Big names in Genesis.
Huge. So, I mean, we've got these names, but it's more than just a list, right?
Oh, yeah. Way more. Different interpretations link these lineages to, like, specific geographic areas. Some even suggest, where modern-day nations came from.
Right. Which gets kind of controversial sometimes.
Well, yeah, because you have to consider the historical context. I mean, back then, genealogy wasn't just about family history. It was about, like, claiming land.
Oh, totally. Like, we're descended from so-and-so, therefore this land is rightfully ours, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Solidifying identity, making sense of this, like, diverse world.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the power dynamics at play.
Yeah, and of course, modern research paints a more complex picture, but it's still incredible.
Yeah, it really is. This idea of trying to connect all of humanity through these ancestral lines. It's fascinating.
It is, yeah. And that kind of sets the stage for a character who really jumps out in this chapter, Nimrod.
Oh yeah, Nimrod, he's introduced in Genesis 10.8 as this mighty hunter before the Lord.
Right.
But some sources suggest he was, well, a lot more than just a skilled hunter.
Yeah, some sources even describe him as a tyrant, a hunter of men, not just animals.
Right. And he's credited with founding some pretty powerful cities, like Babel, which later became Babylon, and Nineveh.
Oh yeah, he was a builder for sure.
So I'm curious, why include this seemingly less than holy figure in the genealogy at all?
Right. Well, maybe it's a way of acknowledging that even within God's chosen line, there's ambition
Yeah,
and a tendency towards rebellion.
that's a good point. Like, it's not always a straightforward, perfect lineage.
Right, exactly. And when you think about it, Nimrod's story, particularly his connection to Babel, it really sets up this tension between, human ambition and God's plan.
Yes, that plays out throughout Genesis and really the whole Bible.
Yeah, I mean, it's like even from the beginning, there's this struggle between wanting to make a name for ourselves and surrendering to a bigger purpose.
Totally. So that brings us to the Tower of Babel, right? Genesis 11.
Right.
Humanity tries to build this tower to reach heaven and basically make a name to themselves.
Yeah, classic story, often seen as a warning, right?
Oh, yeah. Against pride, against the dangers of technology without morality.
Right. And it's so interesting that they used the same materials, asphalt or slime, to build this tower as Noah used to build the ark.
Wait, really? I didn't even catch that.
It's right there in the text.
Wow, it's almost like they're saying, we don't need God's protection. We can reach heaven ourselves.
Yeah, that's one way to interpret it. But then there's this other interpretation about the tower being like an observatory
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
for astrological worship, possibly tying into Nimrod's, let's say questionable spiritual practices.
Right. So was this tower like a symbol of reaching for something beyond human limits, both physically and spiritually?
That's a great question. Was it a sincere attempt to connect with the divine, or was it about gaining power,
Hmm.
knowledge that humans weren't meant to have? Maybe it was a bit of both. It seems like the interpretations agree on one thing, though. Humanity overstepped its bounds.
And the consequences were pretty dramatic.
Oh, yeah. God confuses their languages, scatters people, puts an end to their little project.
The irony, right? Language meant for communication becomes the very tool that divides them.
It is, and it makes you think about, the power of language to shape not just our words, but our cultures, our identities.
Yeah. The story of Babel is a reminder that God has, like, authority over humans' communication.
He can use it to unify or to divide.
Exactly. And it sets the stage for this recurring theme we see in Genesis: the consequences of, well, humanity's attempts to act independent of God.
Right. But it also hints at God's power to bring unity and understanding, even amidst all that diversity.
That's fascinating. It's like the Tower of Babel becomes this pivotal point, this moment where ambition and rebellion lead to fragmentation, but also this foreshadowing of God's ultimate plan for, redemption and unity.
And that's what makes these seemingly simple chapters so profound. They offer a glimpse into, like, the very heart of the human struggle.
Totally. This desire for greatness, our tendency towards pride, this constant tension between our will and God's will. I mean, it's all right there.
And they speak to us today. What towers are we building in our own lives?
Oh, yeah. What ambitions, desires might be leading us away from, God's plan? It's a good question.
Right. And then there are these little details that reveal so much about human nature and God's ways. Like, take the shrinking lifespans, for example.
The what?
The shrinking lifespans mentioned in both chapters. People went from living 800, 900 years down to 200, then 100.
Makes me wish I had a few extra entries. But, on a deeper level, it makes you wonder, is this a commentary on the impact of sin, this increasing separation from God?
It's definitely open to interpretation. But what's fascinating is that this detail about lifespans actually sets up a crucial shift in the narrative.
Okay, how so?
We move from this broad focus on all of humanity to a more focused perspective on one particular family, Abram.
Oh, right.
Who later becomes Abraham and his descendants.
So we're starting to, zero in on the lineage that will eventually lead to Jesus.
Exactly.
It's all connected.
And even Abram, chosen by God, wasn't immune to, human tendency to hesitate.
Right.
Remember, he wasn't perfectly obedient to God's call to leave his home right away.
Oh, yeah, he had his moments.
Caused delays, and a period of barrenness in his life.
So even the father of faith had his moments of doubt and disobedience. It's kind of reassuring, actually.
It is. It really is.
Makes it feel more relatable.
Yeah.
So what's the significance of this shift from like a global to a more focused perspective?
That's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, looking forward to it.
It's going to be fascinating seeing how this shift in focus plays out in the larger narrative of Genesis.
Absolutely.
And what it reveals about God's plan for humanity.
Can't wait.
Like we're zooming in, on this specific thread in this grand tapestry of human history.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic shift, isn't it?
It is, from this sweeping view of nations spinning out, across the globe to this very intimate focus on Abram and his family.
And it makes you wonder, like, why Abram? What made him so special that God chose him and his lineage, to carry this promise forward?
Well, the text itself, it doesn't really give us a clear-cut answer to that question. It simply states that God called Abram to leave his home and go to a land that God would show him. But maybe that's part of the point.
Okay.
Abram's story isn't about his inherent greatness, or specific abilities.
Right.
It's about his willingness to trust and obey God, even when, the path ahead is uncertain.
That's a good point. It's less about, who he was and more about who he was willing to become, right? In response to God's call.
Precisely. And that's a powerful message for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It suggests that God isn't, looking for perfect people. He's looking for people who are willing to surrender their own plans and follow his leading.
Yeah, it's reassuring in a way, right? Because I think about all the times I've hesitated to like step out in faith because I wasn't sure what the outcome would be. So it's encouraging to know that even someone like Abram, who would become, the father of so many nations, had his moments of doubt.
Absolutely. And his story reminds us that faith is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There will be times when we stumble, when we question, when we don't fully understand God's plan. But what matters is that we keep moving forward, trusting that God is with us every step of the way.
And that even our, mistakes and missteps can be part of the journey.
Right.
Like with Abram, his initial hesitation didn't disqualify him from God's purpose. It might have even, deepened his reliance on God.
Exactly. It's a reminder that God can work through our imperfection and use even our failures to shape us, to draw us closer to him.
So we've got this contrast, right,
Yeah.
between the Tower of Babel, where humanity's trying to reach God on their own terms, and then we have Abram who's responding to God's call, even though it means leaving everything familiar behind.
It's like two completely different approaches to connecting with the divine.
Right. It's this tension that we've been talking about, this human ambition versus God's plan.
On the one hand, you have this desire for power, control, self-reliance,
Right.
represented by the Tower of Babel. And on the other hand, you have this posture of humility, trust, obedience.
Embodied in Abram's story.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not like Abram's journey was easy. Leaving your home, your family, your entire way of life, that takes courage.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It makes you wonder what kind of internal battles he must have faced along the way.
Oh, I'm sure there are plenty. But that's also what makes his story so relatable, right? We all face those internal battles, those moments when we have to choose between our own desires and what we believe God is calling us to do.
I'm also, I'm struck by the fact that even though God called Abram to a specific land, he didn't give him all the details up front.
Right.
It was that journey of faith, of trusting that God would lead him, step by step.
That's a beautiful point. It speaks to the nature of faith itself. It's not about having all the answers or knowing exactly where we're going. It's about taking that first step and then the next, trusting that God will illuminate the path as we go.
Let's go back to the Table of Nations for a second, though.
Okay.
It's fascinating how it lays out, the origins of all these different people groups, this diversity of cultures and languages that emerged, after the flood.
Right.
It makes me wonder if the scattering at Babel, while a consequence of disobedience, was also part of God's plan to populate the earth.
That's an intriguing thought. It's like the story of Babel is both a cautionary tale, right, about the dangers of unchecked ambition, but also a recognition of the beauty, and the complexity of human diversity.
It's almost as if God is saying, I want you to fill the earth, but not through force, not through self-aggrandizement. Like, let your differences become a source of creativity, and wonder, not division and conflict.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message for us today, living in a world that often feels more divided than ever.
It does.
It's a reminder that our differences can be strengths, not weaknesses.
It makes you think about how we often let, language, culture, even geography create barriers between us. But what if we saw those differences as opportunities to learn from each other?
Yeah, to broaden our perspectives, to build bridges instead of walls.
Exactly.
That's the challenge, isn't it? To move beyond our comfort zones, to embrace the unfamiliar and to see the image of God reflected in every human face, regardless of their background or beliefs.
It's a tall order for sure.
It is.
But it seems like that's the kind of unity that God is ultimately calling us towards.
A unity that transcends our differences.
Right, and finds its foundation in love, respect, and a shared sense of humanity.
In some interpretations, the Tower of Babel is connected to this concept of Babylon as a symbol of human rebellion against God. And it's fascinating to see how this idea of Babylon reappears throughout the Bible, representing everything from political oppression to spiritual idolatry.
So it's not just about a physical tower. It's about any attempt to create our own kingdoms apart from God's authority.
Exactly. And it makes you think about, what Babylons we might be building in our own lives and in our societies, What systems or structures are we putting in place that prioritize power, wealth, or self-interest over God's values of justice, compassion, love?
Those are some pretty big questions, but I think they're important ones to wrestle with.
They are.
If we want to truly, live out our faith, we have to be willing to examine not just our individual choices, but also the larger systems and structures that shape our world.
You're absolutely right. And it's not about, condemning anyone or judging entire societies. It's about looking honestly at the world around us and asking ourselves, how can we be agents of God's kingdom, bringing healing, reconciliation, hope to a broken world.
Okay, so we've talked about the contrast between the Tower of Babel and Abram's journey. We've explored the significance of the Paper of Nations and this tension between human ambition, and God's plan. We've even touched on this recurring theme of Babylon as a symbol of rebellion. But where does all of this lead? Like, how does it connect to the bigger picture of God's story?
That's a great question. And that's where we'll pick up in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm already intrigued.
We'll explore how these seemingly, ancient stories from Genesis continue to resonate throughout the Bible,
Okay.
and what they reveal about God's ultimate plan for humanity.
Can't wait to see where this journey takes us next. It's amazing how these stories from Genesis 10 and 11, they're like these little seeds sprouting up throughout the whole Bible, you know.
It's sure they really do lay the groundwork for so many key themes that just unfold in the rest of Scripture.
We've talked about the recurring motif of Babylon, right, as a symbol of human rebellion. But there's got to be more to unpack there.
Oh, absolutely, tons more.
Like, give me an example.
Okay, so think about the Tower of Babel story. It's not just about a physical tower, right?
Right.
It's about humanity's attempt to reach God on their own terms, to create their own path to salvation, to become like God themselves. And that same impulse, that desire to usurp God's authority, it shows up time and time ago throughout the Bible.
Yeah, it's like that temptation is just woken into our very nature. Like we want to be in control. We want to make our own destiny. We want to be the masters of our own universe.
Exactly. And the consequences of that kind of thinking are often disastrous. I mean, we see it in the fall of Adam and Eve, the story of Cain and Abel, the building of the golden calf. It's this recurring pattern of rebellion and its consequences.
And yet, even amidst all that failure and disobedience, God never gives up on humanity.
Right,
He
yeah.
he keeps reaching out, offering second chances, revealing his plan of redemption.
That's the beauty of God's grace. It's not dependent on our perfection, our ability to get it right. It's freely given, even when we mess things up royally.
Okay, but how does all of this tie back to Abram? I mean, we left off talking about how God chose him and his family to carry this promise forward. So what's the significance of that shift from a global focus to this more specific lineage?
It's a pivotal moment in the narrative. It's like God is saying, okay, humanity has messed things up pretty badly, but I'm not giving up on my plan. I'm going to start fresh with this one man and his family, and through them I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth.
So it's not just about Abram and his descendants. It's about God using them as a conduit
Right.
to bring blessing and salvation to the whole world.
Precisely. And that's where the story of Jesus ultimately comes in. He's the descendant of Abram, the fulfillment of that promise, the one who bridges the gap between God and humanity.
It's incredible how these seemingly, simple stories from Genesis connect to this grand sweep of God's redemptive plan.
They really do. And they offer us a framework for understanding our own place in that story. We may not be called to build arcs or towers, but we're all invited to participate in God's work of bringing, healing, restoration to the world.
So what does that look like in practical terms? How do we live out these ancient stories in our modern lives?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that same tension between human ambition and God's plan within ourselves.
Yeah.
What towers are we trying to build in our own lives? What ambitions or desires are we pursuing that might be leading us away from God's best for us?
It's a good question to ask ourselves. Are we more focused on making a name for ourselves, or are we seeking to glorify God in all that we do?
Exactly. And it's not about, rejecting ambition altogether. It's about aligning our ambitions with God's purposes, seeking his guidance and wisdom in all that we do.
And I think it also involves embracing, the diversity of God's creation. Just like the Table of Nations reminds us, we live in a world of incredible differences, cultures, languages, beliefs. It's tempting to, to build walls and retreat into our own little corners.
Oh, it is. It is. But what if we saw those differences as opportunities, for growth, for understanding, for even reconciliation? What if we embraced the richness and the complexity of God's creation and sought to build bridges instead of walls?
It wouldn't be easy, that's for sure. But I think it's the kind of challenge that God is calling us to embrace, to move beyond our comfort zones, to step out in faith and to become agents of His love and grace in a world that desperately needs it.
Here's a thought that wasn't directly mentioned in our source materials, but it builds on everything we've been discussing. Remember how we talked about the Tower of Babel as a cautionary tale about technology without morality?
Yes, I do.
Well, think about the rapid advancements that we're seeing today in fields like artificial intelligence. I mean, it's mind-blowing, but it also raises some pretty profound questions, about the nature of humanity, our relationship with technology, and the potential consequences of unchecked ambition.
It's almost as if we're building new towers in the digital age. These complex systems and algorithms that have the potential to reshape our world in profound ways.
Exactly. And just like the builders of Babel, we need to be careful that our pursuit of progress doesn't lead us down a path of destruction. We need to approach these technological advancements with wisdom, with humility, and a deep sense of ethical responsibility.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether.
Right.
It's about using it wisely for the good of humanity and the glory of God.
Well said. Well said. And that's the challenge, to find that balance, to harness the power of human ingenuity while staying grounded in God's truth and love.
Wow, this has been a fascinating journey. We've gone from ancient genealogies to modern technology, all within the span of two chapters in Genesis.
It just goes to show you how rich and relevant these ancient stories are. They offer timeless insights into human nature, God's character, and our place in this grand scheme of things.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some new insights, some new perspectives on Genesis chapters 10 and 11. And as always, we encourage you